Have you ever had someone use your own kindness against you? Imagine spending decades building security for your family, only to be shut out when it's convenient, and welcomed back only when your money is needed. That's what happened to me. My name is Martha Wilson, and this is how my daughter-in-law kept me from seeing my beloved grandchildren, until she discovered she needed access to their trust fund. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It was a crisp autumn day in Ashford when I realized something was terribly wrong. I'd been a widow for just over 2 years by then. My husband James and I had built a wonderful life together in our colonial home on Maple Avenue, the same home where we raised our 2 children, Thomas and Olivia. James had been the financial planner in our family, while I dedicated my life to education, eventually becoming principal at Ashford Elementary before retiring. We weren't extraordinarily wealthy, but James had been meticulous about investing and saving. For our children, he'd always say, and especially for their children. After losing James to heart failure, I'd thrown myself into being the best grandmother possible. My grandchildren, Lily, age 8, and Jack, 5, had become my world. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I'd pick them up after school, bring them to my house for homemade cookies and help with homework, or take them to Riverside Park where Jack could run off his endless energy on the playground while Lily and I sketched the ducks by the pond. Those precious hours twice a week had been my lifeline after James passed, until they weren't anymore. It started innocuously enough. Rebecca, my son's wife, called one Tuesday morning with an apologetic voice. "Martha, I'm so sorry, but Lily has a last-minute playdate today. Can we skip this afternoon?" Of course I understood. Children need friends their own age, not just a doting grandmother. "No problem at all, Becky. We'll make it up on Thursday." But Thursday brought another call. Jack had a slight fever, better to keep him home. The following Tuesday, both children had dentist appointments that couldn't possibly be rescheduled. Thursday, their piano lessons had been moved. 1 cancellation became 2, then 4, then became a pattern I couldn't ignore. When I did get to see the children, Rebecca would invariably appear within an hour, claiming they needed to rush off to some activity or appointment. Our usual afternoons of baking and art projects and stories dwindled to hurried half-hours under Rebecca's watchful gaze. "Is everything all right?" I asked my son Thomas during a rare moment alone. He worked in investment banking and traveled frequently, leaving Rebecca in charge of their daily lives. "I've barely seen Lily and Jack lately." Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. "Mom, you know how busy kids are these days. Becky's just trying to give them every opportunity. Music, sports, coding classes. There are only so many hours in a day." I nodded, not wanting to cause trouble. Perhaps I was being selfish, wanting their time for myself when they had so many enriching activities to pursue. But something felt off. When we did have our brief visits, the children seemed subdued, less willing to share details of their lives. Lily, once so chatty about school and friends, gave one-word answers. Jack no longer ran to me with arms outstretched. Then came the dinner that changed everything. I'd been invited to Thomas and Rebecca's modern home in Oak Ridge Estates for a Sunday meal, something that had once been a weekly tradition but had become increasingly rare. I'd baked Lily's favorite chocolate cake and brought a new dinosaur book for Jack. The house was immaculate as always. Rebecca had a talent for interior design, and their home looked like it belonged in a magazine, beautiful but somehow untouchable. No fingerprints on the glass coffee table, no toys scattered across the pristine cream carpet. Dinner was pleasant enough, though conversation felt strained. Thomas spoke mostly about his work, Rebecca about the charity gala she was helping organize. The children were quiet, eating their perfectly portioned meals with careful manners that seemed unnatural for their ages. "I thought we might go to the Natural History Museum next Saturday," I suggested during dessert. They have that new dinosaur exhibition Jack would love, and Lily mentioned wanting to see the gemstone collection. A silence fell over the table. Rebecca and Thomas exchanged glances. "Actually, Martha," Rebecca said, her voice gentle but firm, "we've been meaning to talk to you about the children's schedule." Thomas cleared his throat. "Mom, the kids have so many activities now. Lily's taking advanced math on weekends, and Jack has soccer. We think it might be easier if we simplified things for a while." "Simplified?" I repeated, not understanding. Rebecca reached across the table, her manicured hand stopping just short of touching mine. "We think it would be best if we paused the regular visits for now, just until things settle down. Maybe we can do monthly dinners here instead, where the children are comfortable in their routine." The cake turned to ash in my mouth. Paused? But the children and I have always had our Tuesdays and Thursdays. "They're just getting so overwhelmed with everything," Rebecca explained, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable. "And frankly, Martha, they come home quite hyper after visiting you. All that sugar and excitement disrupts their sleep schedule." I looked to Thomas, hoping for support, but he was studying his dessert plate. "It's just temporary, Mom," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I glanced at my grandchildren. Lily was staring at her lap, but Jack looked confused, his lower lip trembling slightly. "But Grandma always reads me 3 stories, he said in a small voice. Rebecca smoothed his hair. "You'll still see Grandma, sweetheart, just not as often. And look at all the fun activities you get to do instead." I drove home that night with tears blurring my vision. What had I done wrong? Was I truly disruptive to their routines? I'd always prided myself on being a helpful presence in their lives, not a burden. The weekly visits officially ended. They were replaced with carefully choreographed monthly dinners at their house, where I felt more like a polite acquaintance than a grandmother. Twice I suggested taking the children for ice cream afterward. Twice Rebecca had excuses ready. My daughter Olivia was furious when I finally confided in her. "That's ridiculous, Mom. The kids adore you. Thomas is letting Becky control everything." As usual. "There must be a reason," I said, still trying to be fair. "Maybe the children really are overscheduled." Olivia's husband, Greg, who had been listening nearby, looked up from his laptop. "Have you considered there might be another motivation here, Martha?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You mentioned James set up trusts for the grandchildren. How exactly is that structured?" The question caught me off guard. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In my grief after James died, I'd let many financial details slide. Our longtime accountant handled bill payments, and I trusted that everything else was in order. James had mentioned provisions for the grandchildren, but I couldn't recall the specifics. "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "James handled all that." Greg nodded thoughtfully. "It might be worth looking into, just to be thorough." That night I couldn't sleep. Greg's suggestion gnawed at me. Could there possibly be a connection between my reduced access to my grandchildren and whatever financial arrangements James had made? It seemed far-fetched, almost offensive to consider. Rebecca came from wealth herself. Her parents had that beautiful vacation home in France they were always visiting. What could she possibly want with whatever modest provision James had made? Still, the next morning I found myself drawn to James's study. I'd barely entered the room since his death, finding the space too painful, too full of him. His reading glasses still sat on the desk where he'd left them. The leather chair still held the impression of his form. With a deep breath, I sat in his chair and began opening drawers. James had been meticulously organized, everything labeled, and filed precisely. It didn't take long to find a folder marked Children's Trusts. As I read through the documents, my hands began to tremble. James had been far more prudent than I'd realized. He'd established substantial trust funds for both Lily and Jack, using a portion of his life insurance and investments. The trusts were designed primarily for education and health care, with larger sums to be released when they reach certain milestones: 18, 21, and 25. And there, in black and white, was the detail that made my heart race. I, Martha Wilson, was named as the sole trustee until the children turned 25, with full discretionary authority over disbursements. Rebecca couldn't access a penny of these funds without my approval. I sat back, my mind reeling. Could this really be why I was being gradually pushed out of my grandchildren's lives? Was Rebecca hoping I'd remain ignorant of my position as trustee? Or was she strategically keeping me at arm's length until she needed something? I wasn't a suspicious person by nature. I'd always tried to see the best in others, especially family. But the timing was difficult to ignore. According to Thomas, they had recently enrolled Lily in an exclusive private academy with a substantial tuition. Jack was seeing a specialized occupational therapist that their insurance only partially covered. These were exactly the kinds of expenses the trusts were designed to address. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. It was Rebecca. My heart jumped. Perhaps she was calling to invite me to see the children. But her voice was all business. "Martha, I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Thomas and I were hoping. You might be free for dinner this Friday. Just adults. We have something important to discuss." "Is everything all right?" I asked, wondering if she somehow knew what I'd just discovered. "Everything's fine," she assured me, though her tone was strained. "Just some family matters we'd like your input on." After hanging up, I called Greg immediately. They've invited me to dinner, without the children, to discuss family matters. This can't be a coincidence. "It probably isn't," Greg agreed. "Martha, I know this is difficult, but I think you need to be prepared for them to ask for access to those trust funds, and you need to decide before you go what your conditions will be." Conditions. The word felt harsh, transactional. These were my family members, not business associates. But as I thought about the past few months, the canceled visits, the supervised interactions, the gradual erasure of my role in my grandchildren's lives, I felt a resolve hardening within me. If Rebecca wanted access to the funds James had so carefully set aside for our grandchildren, she would need to respect my place in their lives as well. Friday arrived, and I dressed with care in a blue dress James had always complimented. Brought a bottle of the Pinot Noir Thomas favored, determined to begin the evening on a positive note, despite my inner turmoil. Rebecca answered the door looking picture-perfect as always, her blonde hair swept up elegantly, wearing a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire outfit. "Martha, thank you for coming," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Thomas is just finishing up a work call. Come in." The house felt emptier without the children. "Are Lily and Jack already in bed?" I asked, though it was barely 7 o'clock. "They're having a sleepover at my parents' house," Rebecca replied smoothly. "We thought it would be nice to have an adult conversation without interruptions." "Of course. Heaven forbid I might actually see my grandchildren during this visit." Thomas emerged from his home office, looking tired but managing a genuine smile when he saw me. "Mom, thanks for coming." His hug felt real at least. For all his faults, I knew my son loved me. He had always been more like James, conflict-averse, preferring to keep the peace even when it meant yielding to stronger personalities. Rebecca, with her clear vision and determination, had easily become the decision-maker in their marriage. Dinner was Rebecca's signature lasagna, accompanied by an expensive bottle of wine Thomas had been saving for a special occasion. The conversation remained light through the first course. Community gossip, Thomas's recent business trip, Rebecca's tennis league. But I could feel the underlying tension. The careful avoidance of whatever family matter had prompted this dinner. Finally, as Rebecca served tiramisu for dessert, Thomas cleared his throat. Mom, we wanted to talk to you about something important. I set down my fork and waited. It's about the children's education, Rebecca began, her voice carefully modulated. As you know, Lily started at Oak Ridge Academy this fall. It's an incredible opportunity. Their STEM program is unparalleled, and she's already flourishing there. I nodded. I hadn't actually known about the change in schools since no one had bothered to tell me, but I kept that to myself. And Jack, Thomas continued, has been seeing Dr. Levine for his sensory processing issues. He's made tremendous progress. Again, news to me. Jack had always been an energetic child, but no one had mentioned any issues requiring therapy. That all sounds wonderful, I said carefully. I'm happy they're getting the support they need. Rebecca and Thomas exchanged glances. The thing is, Thomas said, looking uncomfortable, these expenses are significant. The academy's tuition is substantial, and Dr. Levine doesn't take insurance. We're managing, Rebecca added quickly, but we've been thinking about the children's future. College costs are only going to increase, and we want to make sure they have every advantage. Here it comes, I thought. We recently met with our financial advisor, Thomas continued, and he mentioned that Dad might have set up some kind of educational trust for the kids. We thought you might know about it. I took a slow sip of water, collecting my thoughts. They were trying to be casual, as if this wasn't the entire reason for the dinner party, as if they hadn't been systematically reducing my role in their lives while suddenly developing an interest in whatever financial arrangements James had made. Yes, I said finally. James did establish trusts for both Lily and Jack. Rebecca's eyes lit up, though she quickly composed her expression. That's wonderful news. James was always so thoughtful about the future. He was, I agreed. He wanted to make sure his grandchildren would have support for their education and healthcare needs. Thomas leaned forward eagerly. Do you know how we would access those funds? For the academy tuition, for instance? I met his gaze steadily. I'm the trustee, Thomas. Any disbursements would need to be approved by me. The room went silent. Rebecca's smile froze on her face. You're the trustee? Thomas repeated, sounding surprised. I assumed it would be both of us, or maybe the bank. I shook my head. James was very specific. He named me as sole trustee until the children turned 25. Rebecca set down her wine glass with a slightly too forceful click against the table. Well, that's unexpected, but I'm sure you'll want to help with Lily's tuition. The academy is preparing her for an exceptional future. And Jack's therapy, Thomas added. It's making such a difference. I took a deep breath. I'm happy to consider any expenses that benefit my grandchildren. James set up these trusts precisely for educational and health needs. Wonderful, Rebecca said, visibly relaxing. If you could just transfer the tuition amount to our account, we can take care of the payments directly. It's due quarterly. I'll need to see the enrollment documentation, I said calmly. And for Jack's therapy, I'd like to meet with Dr. Levine to understand the treatment plan. The trust requires me to keep records of all disbursements. Rebecca's smile tightened. That seems unnecessary. We can just forward you the bills. I'm afraid that's not how it works, I replied. As trustee, I have a fiduciary responsibility to understand exactly how the funds are being used. James was very clear about that. Thomas jumped in, clearly, sensing his wife's growing irritation. Mom, we're not asking you to just hand over the money. We're talking about our children's education and health. I understand that, I said, and I'm more than happy to support both. But there's something else we need to discuss. I set down my napkin and looked directly at Rebecca. I've barely seen Lily and Jack in months. Every attempt I make to spend time with them is canceled or cut short. If I'm to fulfill my responsibilities as trustee, understanding their needs and ensuring the funds are used appropriately. I need to actually be part of their lives. Rebecca's cheeks flushed. Are you suggesting that we're only interested in the trust money? That's insulting, Martha. I'm not suggesting anything, I replied, keeping my voice level. I'm simply stating two facts. I have a responsibility, as trustee, to be involved in decisions about my grandchildren's education and welfare, and I've been systematically prevented from spending time with them for months now. Both of these situations need to change. Thomas looked pained. Mom, it's not like that. We've just been trying to establish routines, maintain consistency for the kids. Then perhaps we should establish a new routine, I suggested. One that includes regular, unsupervised time with their grandmother. The same grandmother who's being asked to fund their education and health care. Rebecca pushed her chair back. Slightly. So you're using your position as trustee to force your way back into our family schedule? That's manipulative, Martha. The accusation stung, but I held my ground. No more manipulative than suddenly inviting me to dinner to discuss the trust funds after months of keeping me at arm's length. The facade of pleasantry shattered. Rebecca stood up, her expression cold. I think it's time for you to leave. Thomas looked horrified. Becky, wait! But Rebecca was already walking toward the front door, her back rigid with anger. I gathered my purse and cardigan. I'm sorry it came to this, I told Thomas, who looked torn between following his wife and apologizing to me. I love Lily and Jack more than anything. All I want is to be part of their lives, to see them grow. The money was never meant to be a weapon. It was James's gift to ensure their future. Mom, Thomas began, but Rebecca called his name sharply from the hallway, and he fell silent. I left their beautiful house with a heavy heart, but a newfound clarity. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Ashford, I realized the power dynamics in our family had just fundamentally shifted. For years, I had been the one seeking approval, trying to accommodate Rebecca's increasingly restrictive boundaries, grateful for whatever crumbs of time with my grandchildren I was allowed. Now, with the discovery of my role as trustee, the scales had tipped. Rebecca needed something from me, something significant. The question was, would she recognize that maintaining a loving relationship between grandchildren and grandmother was in everyone's best interest? Or would this revelation only deepen the rift between us? When I reached my empty house, I sat in the darkened car for several minutes, too emotionally drained to move. On the passenger seat lay a small gift bag containing the presents I'd brought for Lily and Jack, a watercolor set for her, a dinosaur, model kit for him, presents I hadn't been able to give because, once again, they had been kept from me. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Olivia. How did dinner go? I couldn't bring myself to type out the whole story. Instead, I simply wrote, they want the trust money. Everything's changed now. Her response came seconds later. Coming to visit this weekend. Don't do anything until we talk. I smiled faintly at my daughter's protective instinct. Olivia had always been the fighter in the family, quick to defend those she loved. Thomas, like his father, preferred harmony at all costs. Inside the house, I went straight to James's study and retrieved the trust documents, spreading them across the kitchen table. I needed to understand exactly what powers and responsibilities I had. If Rebecca and Thomas were going to treat this as a business transaction, I needed to be fully informed. The language was complex, full of legal terminology, but the essential facts were clear. As trustee, I had significant discretion over how and when the funds were disbursed. The trust specified educational and healthcare expenses as primary purposes, but also allowed for other expenditures that I determined to be in the best interest of the beneficiaries. I had both legal rights and responsibilities. I couldn't simply withhold funds out of spite. That would be a violation of my fiduciary duty. But I could establish reasonable conditions and expectations around communication and involvement. As I read deeper into the documents, something else caught my eye. There was a provision I hadn't noticed before. In the event that I was unable or unwilling to serve as trustee, the role would pass to Olivia, not Thomas. James had clearly anticipated potential conflicts and taken steps to ensure the trusts would be managed according to his wishes, even if family dynamics became complicated. Knowing James, this wasn't an oversight or a slight against our son. He had simply recognized Thomas's tendency to avoid conflict, particularly with Rebecca. James had loved Thomas dearly, but had no illusions about his character. I closed the folder, my resolve strengthening. This wasn't about using money as leverage to see my grandchildren. This was about restoring balance to a relationship that had become increasingly one-sided. Rebecca and Thomas needed to understand that we were family, not just when they wanted financial support, but always. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and decisions. For tonight, I allowed myself to feel the hurt of being pushed aside, of missing precious months of my grandchildren's lives. I opened my phone to the last photos I had of them. Lily showing me her science project, Jack with chocolate ice cream. Covering his gleeful face, their childhood was flying by, and I was missing it. Not anymore, I whispered to the quiet house. Not if I can help it. The morning after that disastrous dinner, I awoke to 3 missed calls from Thomas. No voicemails. Just calls at increasingly late hours, the last one at nearly midnight. I wasn't ready to speak with him yet, not until I'd sorted through my own thoughts. I made my morning tea and carried it out to the back porch, where James and I had spent so many peaceful mornings watching the birds flit around our garden. The Japanese maple he'd planted for our 35th anniversary was turning a brilliant scarlet. He would have loved to see it. My phone buzzed again. Thomas. With a deep breath, I answered. Mom? Finally. I've been trying to reach you. I was asleep, I said simply. It's early, Thomas. He sighed, the sound crackling through the line. About last night, things got out of hand. Yes, they did. Becky was upset. She feels like you're holding the trust over our heads. I took a slow sip of tea before responding. Is that what you think too? A pause. I think everyone's intentions got lost. We want what's best for the kids, and I know you do too. Of course I do. That's why your father established those trusts to ensure their future. Look, Mom, I'm sorry if we've been restrictive about visits lately. Things have just been hectic. But using the trust as leverage? I'm not using anything as leverage, Thomas, I interrupted, my patience wearing thin. I'm stating 2 facts. I am the legally appointed trustee of your children's trusts, and I have been systematically excluded from their lives. Both of these things are true, and both need to be addressed. Mom? Do you even know how long it's been since I've been allowed a full afternoon with Lily and Jack? Do you know that the last 3 times I brought them presents, Rebecca forgot to have them open them while I was there? Do you know that Lily's art teacher asked her why her grandmother never comes to her exhibitions anymore, and Lily said it was because I don't care enough? My voice cracked on the last sentence. I hadn't meant to reveal that. Eleanor had told me about Lily's comment after speaking with the art teacher at a community event. There was silence on the other end of the line. I didn't know that, Thomas finally said, his voice smaller. No, I don't suppose you did. I gathered myself, determined not to let emotion overrule reason. Thomas, I'm not withholding funds out of spite. I'm saying that as trustee, I have both a right and a responsibility to be involved in decisions about the children's education and welfare. That's not manipulation. It's the literal purpose of a trustee. What exactly are you asking for, Mom? Regular, unsupervised time with my grandchildren. The same schedule we had before, Tuesdays and Thursdays after school. Information about their education and activities. Inclusion in important decisions and events. I paused. Basically, I'm asking to be their grandmother again, not just a signature on a check. Thomas was quiet for so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Finally, he said, "I'll talk to Becky." "You do that," I replied, then added more, gently, "I love you, Thomas, and I love those children more than anything. I just want to be part of their lives." "I know, Mom," he said, and I could hear the weariness in his voice. "I'll call you later." After hanging up, I called Olivia to fill her in on the dinner fiasco and Thomas's morning call. My daughter's reaction was predictably fiery. "Unbelievable. So they've been freezing you out for months, and the minute they need money, suddenly, they want a relationship? And then they have the nerve to accuse you of manipulation." "That about sums it up," I said. "Dad was right to make you the trustee," Olivia declared. "He must have foreseen something like this." "I don't think even James could have predicted this particular scenario," I said with a sad smile. "But he did understand people's characters. He knew Thomas would always take the path of least resistance with Rebecca." "So what now?" Olivia asked. "Now we wait. Thomas said he'd talk to Rebecca. I made my position clear. I'm happy to fulfill my duties as trustee, which include paying for legitimate educational and healthcare expenses, but I expect to be included in their lives again." Olivia snorted. "Good luck with that. Becky won't give up control easily." She was right. The rest of the day passed without word from Thomas. I distracted myself with gardening, then met Eleanor for lunch at Maple Street Cafe, careful not to check my phone every 5 minutes like a teenager waiting for a call. It was nearly dinner time when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rebecca standing on my porch, alone. Her usual polished appearance was slightly frayed at the edges, hair not quite perfectly styled, a faint smudge on the sleeve of her camel coat. "Rebecca," I said, genuinely surprised. "Please, come in." She stepped inside, her movements stiff. We stood awkwardly in my entryway for a moment before I gestured toward the living room. "Would you like some tea, or something stronger?" "No, thank you," she replied, seating herself on the edge of the sofa. "I won't stay long." I sat in James's old armchair across from her, waiting. Rebecca crossed her legs, then uncrossed them. "Thomas told me about your conversation this morning." I nodded but said nothing. "I want to be clear about something," she continued, her voice tightly controlled. "I have never intentionally kept the children from you. We've simply been establishing boundaries and routines that work for our family." I bit back a dozen retorts, letting her continue. "That said, I recognize that you are the children's grandmother, and they do love you." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her slacks. "And as trustee of their educational funds, you obviously have an interest in their schooling." "I have an interest in their entire lives, Rebecca, not just their education." Her jaw tightened momentarily. "Of course. What I'm saying is, perhaps, we can find a compromise that works for everyone." "I'm listening." Rebecca pulled a small leather planner from her purse. "I've been looking at our schedule. The children have activities most days after school, but we could arrange for you to have them every other Sunday, from noon until 4. "Every other Sunday? For 4 hours?" I couldn't keep the dismay from my voice. "Rebecca, that's less time than I had before." "It's consistent time," she countered. "Guaranteed on the calendar. No last-minute cancellations." "What about school functions, recitals, sports events?" She hesitated. "We'll make sure you're informed about those. You can attend if you wish." I studied her face, noting the careful calculation behind her expression. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a business proposal. "And in exchange for this generous visitation schedule, you'd like me to release funds for Lily's private school tuition and Jack's therapy sessions?" I asked, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. Rebecca flushed. This isn't a transaction, Martha. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. No, you're trying to give up as little as possible while getting what you want, I said flatly. 4 hours every 2 weeks isn't being a grandmother, Rebecca. It's being an occasional visitor. What exactly do you want then? She asked, frustration edging into her voice. I want what I had before. Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, regular phone calls with the children, inclusion in special events, the ability to take them places without supervision, like any normal grandmother would. Rebecca's expression hardened. That's disruptive to their routine. They have piano on Tuesdays and Jack has soccer on Thursdays now. Then Mondays and Wednesdays, or weekends. I'm flexible on the days, Rebecca. What I'm not flexible on is being treated like an outsider in my grandchildren's lives. We stared at each other across the coffee table, two women locked in a battle of wills that was ostensibly about schedules, but really about so much more. About power, about family, about what constituted love. I'll have to discuss this with Thomas, she finally said. Yes, please do. And while you're discussing, you might want to consider this. I leaned forward. The trust doesn't just cover tuition and medical expenses. It's meant for anything that benefits the children's welfare and development. Piano lessons, summer camps, college visits eventually, even family vacations that have educational value. As trustee, I'll need to be involved in all those decisions too. Rebecca stood abruptly. This conversation is over. I came here in good faith, Martha. No, you came here to see how little you could offer while still getting access to the trust, I replied, rising as well. That's not good faith. That's negotiation. And if we're negotiating, you should know my terms aren't negotiable. I want a real relationship with my grandchildren, not a scheduled visitation. You're impossible, she snapped, gathering her purse. I'm their grandmother, I corrected, and I'm not going anywhere. After Rebecca stormed out, I sat back down, my hands trembling slightly. Confrontation had never been my strong suit. That had been James's department when necessary. But some things were worth fighting for, and my relationship with Lily and Jack absolutely was. My phone pinged with a text from Olivia. Well? I replied. Rebecca offered every other Sunday for 4 hours. I declined. Olivia's response was immediate. Good. Hold your ground. Greg says legally they don't have a leg to stand on. I wasn't sure if that was comforting or not. I didn't want this to become a legal battle. I wanted it to be a family reconnection. But Rebecca's visit had made one thing clear. She saw this purely as a transaction, a power struggle to be won or lost. 3 days passed with no word from either Thomas or Rebecca. I tried to focus on my volunteer work at the community center, on my book club, on anything but the ache of missing my grandchildren. Then, on the 4th day, as I was deadheading roses in my garden, a familiar sound made me freeze. Grandma! I turned to see Jack racing across the lawn, his little legs pumping with all their might, Lily following more sedately behind him with Thomas bringing up the rear. Jack launched himself into my arms with such force I nearly toppled backward. Grandma, we brought cookies, and I lost a tooth, see? He opened his mouth wide to display the gap where his bottom front tooth had been. Oh my goodness, I exclaimed, hugging him tightly. The tooth fairy must have visited. She gave me $5, he announced proudly. That's quite generous, I said, looking up as Lily approached. Hello, sweetheart. Lily allowed me to hug her, her body stiff at first, but gradually relaxing. Hi, Grandma. Do you still have my watercolors here? Of course I do, I assured her. They're right in the craft drawer where you left them. Would you like to paint today? She nodded, a small smile finally appearing. I looked questioningly at Thomas, who stood awkwardly by the garden gate. This is a lovely surprise. He shrugged, hands in his pockets. The kids have been asking about you. I thought we'd stop by. I noticed he carefully avoided mentioning Rebecca or any resolution to our ongoing conflict. This visit wasn't an official reconciliation. It was Thomas making an independent decision, probably while Rebecca was occupied elsewhere. But I wasn't going to question it. Not when Jack was already tugging me toward the house, chattering about his new dinosaur book, and Lily was asking if I still had the special cookies with the jam centers. For the next 2 hours, we fell back into our old patterns. I helped Lily set up her watercolors on the porch table while Jack built an elaborate fortress with the blocks I kept in the spare room. Thomas hovered at first, but eventually relaxed enough to help Jack with a particularly tricky tower. When it was time for them to leave, both children hugged me fiercely. I fought back tears as I watched them climb into Thomas's car, waving, until they turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Thomas lingered a moment on the porch. "They've missed you," he admitted. "More than I realized. I've missed them too, every day." He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Rebecca is. She's processing things. She doesn't like feeling cornered." "Neither do I pointed out. "And I've been cornered out of my grandchildren's lives for months now." Thomas sighed. "I know. I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry, Mom." His apology, simple as it was, eased something in my heart. "Thank you." "We'll figure this out," he promised, then hesitated. "About the trust funds." And there it was, the real reason for the impromptu visit. "We can discuss those once we've established a regular schedule for visits," I said firmly. "One that respects my role as their grandmother, not just their trustee." Thomas opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it and simply nodded. "I'll talk to Becky." After he left, I called Olivia to report on the surprise visit. "It's progress," I told her, "but I'm not naive enough to think this resolves everything." "Of course not," she agreed. "Becky's just regrouping. She sent Thomas and the kids as goodwill ambassadors while she figures out her next move." "That's cynical," I chided, though privately I feared she might be right. "It's realistic," Olivia countered. "Greg and I are still coming this weekend. We can review the trust documents together and make sure you're fully prepared for whatever happens next." The next morning, I received an email from Rebecca. Formal, businesslike, with Thomas CC'd. She proposed a new arrangement. I could have the children every Wednesday afternoon for 3 hours and 1 Saturday per month for a special outing. All visits would be scheduled at least a week in advance, and any changes would require 48 hours' notice from either side. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a significant improvement over her previous offer. At the bottom of the email, she'd included a cordial but pointed note. "Once we've agreed on this schedule, we can discuss the paperwork required for the trust distributions for Lily's tuition and Jack's therapy sessions." I stared at the screen, weighing my options. This was clearly a negotiating tactic, offering more visitation while still maintaining control and making access to the trust funds contingent on my acceptance. After careful consideration, I replied, "Thank you for your proposal. I accept the Wednesday and Saturday schedule as a starting point, with the understanding that we'll revisit and potentially expand it after 3 months. Regarding the trust distributions, please send me the school enrollment documents for Lily and Dr. Levine's treatment plan for Jack. I'll need to review these before approving any disbursements, as required by the trust terms." I copied Thomas as well, then hit send before I could second-guess myself. It wasn't a total victory, but it was a workable compromise. One that got my foot back in the door of my grandchildren's lives while still maintaining my responsibilities as trustee. Rebecca's response came within the hour. "We accept these terms. Documentation will be provided by the end of the week. Lily and Jack will expect you next Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. It was stilted, cold, and entirely focused on the practical details. But it was an agreement. For now, that would have to be enough. When Olivia and Greg arrived that weekend, they were both skeptical of the arrangement. It's still too restrictive, Olivia argued as we sat around my kitchen table reviewing the trust documents. Dad would hate seeing his grandchildren parceled out like this. It's a starting point, I explained. I can build from here. The important thing is being back in their lives consistently. Greg studied the email exchange thoughtfully. From a legal standpoint, you've maintained your position well. You haven't committed to any specific disbursements until you've reviewed the documentation, and you've established that this schedule is preliminary, not permanent. I'm not approaching this as a legal battle, I said. These are my grandchildren, not assets to be divided. Unfortunately, Rebecca doesn't seem to share that perspective, Greg noted. She's treating this like a business negotiation, which means you need to be prepared for her to continue testing boundaries. He was right, as it turned out. The first test came the very next week, when Rebecca sent me the documentation for Lily's school tuition. A simple invoice with the school's letterhead showing a quarterly payment of $8,500 due within 2 weeks. This isn't sufficient, I told Thomas when he called to ask why I hadn't yet transferred the funds. I need the enrollment agreement, the school's educational philosophy, Lily's class schedule, the complete picture of what we're investing. And, Mom, it's a prestigious academy, Thomas said, sounding exasperated. You can look at their website if you want to know about their philosophy. That's not how this works, I replied. The trust requires me to make informed decisions about distributions. I'm not being difficult. I'm fulfilling my legal obligations. Eventually, Rebecca provided the requested documentation, grudgingly with a terse note about unnecessary complications. But I stood firm, reviewing everything carefully before approving the tuition payment. The information about Jack's therapy was even more enlightening. Dr. Levine was indeed a respected occupational therapist, but the issues he was addressing seemed relatively minor. Some sensitivity to loud noises, a tendency to become overstimulated in chaotic environments. These weren't the serious sensory processing issues Thomas had implied, but rather the normal variations of childhood temperament that might benefit from professional guidance, but hardly constituted a crisis. Still, I approved those payments. 2. If Jack was benefiting from the sessions, that was what mattered. But I also requested a meeting with Dr. Levine, as was my right as trustee. Rebecca was furious. That's confidential medical information, she snapped when I mentioned it during a drop-off. You're overstepping. Actually, I'm not, I replied calmly. As trustee of the fund paying for his treatment and as his grandmother, I have both a right and a responsibility to understand his care. I'm not asking for private session details, just a general overview of the treatment approach and goals. She glared at me but didn't argue further. The meeting with Dr. Levine was scheduled for the following week. Meanwhile, my Wednesday afternoons with Lily and Jack quickly became the highlight of my week. The first visit had been somewhat awkward, the children slightly reserved, as if unsure how to interact with me after the long separation. But by the second week, we'd fallen back into our comfortable rhythms. Jack brought his dinosaur books for me to read, and Lily showed me her latest art projects from school. I was careful to have them home precisely on time, to respect the boundaries Rebecca had established. Building trust would take time, and I didn't want to give her any excuse to restrict access again. The Saturday outing was even more special. I took the children to the Natural History Museum as I'd originally suggested, watching Jack's eyes widen at the massive dinosaur skeletons and Lily's thoughtful examination of the gemstone collection. We had lunch in the museum cafe, took dozens of photos, and returned with small souvenirs from the gift shop. When I dropped them off, both children were bubbling with excitement, eager to tell their parents about everything they'd seen. Rebecca's smile was stiff as she listened, but Thomas seemed genuinely pleased by their enthusiasm. They had a great time, he told me quietly, as the children rushed inside to put their new treasures in their rooms. Thank you for that. It's what grandmothers do, I replied simply. The meeting with Dr. Levine proved illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. He was a kind, thoughtful man who clearly took his work seriously. He explained that while Jack did have some sensory sensitivities, they were mild and responding well to therapy. Honestly, he confided, many of the children I see have similar traits. Our world can be overwhelming even for adults. Jack is learning tools to self-regulate, which will serve him well throughout life. And the twice-weekly sessions? I asked. Are they all necessary? Dr. Levine hesitated. I actually recommended once weekly initially. Mrs. Wilson requested the more intensive schedule. That was interesting. Rebecca had been the one pushing for more therapy that, coincidentally, required more funds from the trust. In your professional opinion, I asked carefully, would Jack be equally well served by returning to a once-weekly schedule? At this stage, yes, he confirmed. He's made excellent progress. We could reassess in a few months, but for now, once weekly would be appropriate. I thanked him and made a mental note to discuss this with Thomas, alone, not with Rebecca present. If Jack truly needed intensive therapy, the trust would absolutely cover it. But if Rebecca was inflating his needs to access more funds, that was concerning on multiple levels. The next challenge came in the form of an unexpected email from Rebecca, requesting a special disbursement from the trust for a summer program for Lily, a prestigious arts camp in New Hampshire that cost nearly $6,000 for a 3-week session. Lily has shown exceptional artistic talent, Rebecca wrote. This program is highly selective and would provide valuable enrichment within the educational parameters of the trust. I reviewed the program materials carefully. It did indeed look exceptional, with renowned instructors and an impressive curriculum. But something felt off about the timing and presentation of this request. I called Lily during one of our regular phone conversations. I heard about this art camp your mom found, I said casually. It looks wonderful. Are you excited about it? There was a pause. What art camp? My suspicion deepened. The one in New Hampshire, for 3 weeks this summer. I don't know anything about that, Lily said, sounding confused. Mom hasn't told me about any camp. I changed the subject, not wanting to put Lily in an awkward position, but my concerns were confirmed. Rebecca had requested thousands of dollars for a program she hadn't even discussed with Lily yet. Was she testing how easily I would approve? Expenditures? Or perhaps planning to use the funds for something else entirely? I replied to Rebecca's email. The program looks excellent, but before approving such a significant expense, I'd like to confirm that Lily is interested in attending. Perhaps we could discuss it together during my next Wednesday visit. Rebecca's response was terse. I was planning to surprise her once acceptance was confirmed. There's no need to involve her in the application process yet. I stood my ground. I understand wanting to create a special surprise, but given the length and intensity of the program, I think Lily should be part of the decision-making process. The trust is intended to support her interests and development, not to impose experiences she hasn't chosen. 2 days later, Rebecca withdrew the request, claiming they'd found a more suitable local program instead. I never heard about the New Hampshire camp again. The pattern continued over the next few weeks, Rebecca making increasingly elaborate requests for trust disbursements, me carefully evaluating each one according to the trust terms and the children's actual needs and interests. It was a strange dance, one where we both pretended we were simply discussing finances while actually engaging in a deeper power struggle over the children's lives and futures. Throughout it all, I maintained my Wednesday visits and monthly Saturday outings, gradually rebuilding my relationships with Lily and Jack. They began calling me between visits, first with Rebecca obviously monitoring the calls, later more spontaneously. Lily sent me photos of her art projects. Jack wanted to read me stories he'd written at school. Thomas remained caught in the middle, clearly uncomfortable with the ongoing tension, but unwilling to directly challenge Rebecca. He made small gestures of reconciliation, inviting me to Sunday dinners occasionally, making sure I received school photos. stopping by with the children when Rebecca was at her tennis matches. It wasn't the warm, uncomplicated family relationship I'd hoped for, but it was a vast improvement over the isolation of the previous months. I was part of my grandchildren's lives again, even if that involvement came with complicated strings attached. The real turning point came unexpectedly, nearly 3 months into our new arrangement. I was at home gardening when I received a call from Lily's school. She had fallen during recess and hurt her arm, possibly broken, and they needed a family member to come immediately. They'd been unable to reach either parent. "I'm her grandmother," I said, already grabbing my car keys. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. At the school, I found Lily in the nurse's office, pale and trying not to cry, her arm carefully immobilized in a makeshift sling. The school secretary looked relieved to see me. "We've been trying to contact her parents," she explained. "Mr. Wilson's phone goes straight to voicemail and Mrs. Wilson isn't answering." "Thomas is in Boston for a conference today," I recalled. "I'm not sure about Rebecca. I'm authorized to take Lily for medical care. This wasn't strictly confirmed in our current arrangement, but it was a medical emergency, and I wasn't about to leave my granddaughter in pain while we sorted out Rebecca's permission protocols." "You're listed as an emergency contact," the secretary confirmed after checking her computer. "That's sufficient." I drove Lily to the ER, holding her good hand while she fought back tears. "It really hurts, Grandma," she admitted quietly. "I know, sweetheart. We'll get it fixed up soon." I kept my voice calm and reassuring, though inside I was seething that neither parent was reachable during a school day. At the hospital, I finally managed to reach Thomas, who was in the middle of a presentation and couldn't leave immediately. "Mom, thank God you were available. I'll get there as soon as I can, but it'll be at least 3 hours." "Don't worry, I've got this," I assured him. "Just keep trying to reach Rebecca." X-rays confirmed a fracture that would require a cast. Throughout the whole process, the examinations, the pain medication, the casting procedure, I stayed at Lily's side, distracting her with stories about her father's similar broken arm when he was 10, promising ice cream once we were finished. We were just leaving the hospital, Lily sporting a bright purple cast and finally smiling a little when Rebecca called. "Where is Lily?" she demanded without preamble. "The school said she's been taken to the hospital?" "She broke her arm at recess," I explained. "We're just leaving the ER now. She has a cast and is doing fine." "You took her to the hospital?" Rebecca's voice rose. "Without my permission?" I felt my patience snap. "Yes, Rebecca, I took my injured granddaughter to get medical care when neither of her parents could be reached. What would you have preferred? That she sit in the school nurse's office in pain for hours? You should have kept trying to reach me. I was in a meeting. A meeting more important than your daughter's broken arm?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, and I glanced at Lily, but she was distracted by a text message on my phone, Thomas checking in again. Rebecca fell silent for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was tight but controlled. "Where are you now? I'll come get her." "We're on our way to get ice cream, as promised for being so brave," I said, softening my tone. "Then I'll bring her home. She's had pain medication and is comfortable right now." Another pause. "Fine. I'll meet you at the house in an hour." When we arrived at their home, Rebecca was waiting on the porch. She rushed to Lily, examining the cast, asking about pain levels, suddenly every inch the concerned mother. Lily recounted the whole adventure with growing animation, particularly emphasizing the ice cream sundae with extra hot fudge that Grandma said I totally deserved. Rebecca listened, her expression a complex mixture of concern for Lily and lingering resentment toward me. Finally, she said, "Why don't you go show your cast to Jack? He's been very worried about you." Once Lily was inside, Rebecca turned to me. "Thank you for taking care of her today," she said stiffly. "I should have been reachable." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. I nodded, accepting it for what it was. "The hospital will send the bills directly to Your insurance, I told her. If there are any remaining costs, the trust can cover them. Just forward me the statements. Of course, she replied automatically, then hesitated. Would you like to come in? Thomas texted that he's on his way. Home, but it will be a while still. The invitation surprised me. Yes, I'd like that, I said simply. Inside, I helped Lily get comfortable on the couch, showing her how to keep her arm elevated on pillows. Jack was fascinated by the cast, asking 1,000 questions, and carefully drawing a small dinosaur on it with markers. Rebecca reluctantly provided. It was oddly peaceful, the four of us together in their living room. Rebecca made coffee and even offered me a slice of banana bread. We didn't discuss the trust or visitation schedules or any of the thorny issues that had dominated our interactions for months. We just focused on Lily's needs and comfort. When Thomas finally arrived, breathless and worried, he seemed momentarily taken aback to find Rebecca and me sitting together without obvious tension. Lily proudly showed him her cast, now adorned with multiple dinosaurs thanks to Jack's artistic efforts. Mom took care of everything, Rebecca said, and there was a new note in her voice, something that might, with optimism, be interpreted as respect. It wasn't a complete transformation. Rebecca didn't suddenly become warm and welcoming, nor did all the trust issues magically resolve. But something fundamental shifted that day. Perhaps it was the reminder that in a crisis, family transcends negotiated schedules and financial arrangements. Perhaps it was simply seeing firsthand that my love for the children was genuine and not contingent on my role as trustee. Whatever the reason, the walls began to come down, slowly but noticeably. My Wednesday visits expanded to include dinner. The monthly Saturday outings became bi-weekly, then weekly. Rebecca started sending me school newsletters and art project photos without prompting. Thomas, relieved by the easing tensions, began stopping by my house more often, sometimes with the children, sometimes alone, reclaiming our mother-son relationship that had been strained for too long. 3 months after Lily's broken arm, as summer began in earnest, Rebecca did something I never expected. She invited me to accompany them on their annual week at the lake house. The children would love having you there, she said, almost managing to sound like it had been her idea all along. And frankly, an extra pair of hands would be helpful. It wasn't a declaration of unconditional love. It wasn't an apology for the months of separation. But it was an acknowledgement that I belonged in the family circle, not just as a trustee managing funds, but as a grandmother who loved her grandchildren and whom they loved in return. As I packed my suitcase for the lake trip, I found myself thinking of James. He had created the trust to ensure the children's future, yes, but perhaps he had also, in his quiet wisdom, created a safeguard against exactly the kind of family fracture we had experienced. A reason for us to work through our differences rather than retreat to separate corners. You were right, as usual, I whispered to his photo on my bedside table. Family is worth fighting for. And this particular battle, difficult as it had been, was one I was finally winning. Not through legal maneuvers or financial leverage, but through the steady persistence of a grandmother's love, a force more powerful than any trust fund could ever be. The lake house trip marked a turning point in my relationship with Rebecca, but it wasn't quite the idyllic family vacation one might have hoped for. Old habits die hard, and while Rebecca had extended the invitation, she still maintained an invisible boundary around her immediate family unit. I was welcome, but as an auxiliary member, not quite part of the inner circle. Still, I treasured every moment with Lily and Jack. We built sandcastles on the narrow beach, went fishing off the weathered dock, and roasted marshmallows as the sun set over the water. Jack insisted I read him 3 bedtime stories each night, just like the old days, and Lily spent hours showing me the proper techniques for sketching the pine trees that surrounded the property. One evening, as we adults sat on the deck after the children had gone to bed, Thomas opened a second bottle of wine, and conversation drifted toward the children's future plans. "We're thinking about sending Jack to the same academy as Lily next year," Rebecca said, swirling her wine glass. "The early childhood program has an excellent reputation." "It's quite expensive," Thomas added, glancing at me. "But with the trust covering Lily's tuition, we could manage it." I noted the assumption that the trust would automatically continue funding Lily's education. Not an unreasonable assumption, perhaps, but still presumptuous, given our history. "Jack seems to be enjoying his preschool," I observed. "Is there a particular reason for the change?" Rebecca straightened slightly in her chair. "The academy provides a more structured environment, better preparation for elementary school. And all his cousins on Rebecca's side attend," Thomas added. "It would be good for him to build those relationships." I nodded thoughtfully. "If that's what you both think is best, I'd like to visit the early childhood program before the next disbursement. See the classrooms, meet some teachers. As trustee, I should understand what we're investing in." Rebecca's expression tightened momentarily, but she managed a smile. "Of course. We can arrange that when we get back." It was a small victory in our ongoing détente, acknowledging my role without immediate resistance. Progress, however, incremental. Later that night, Thomas found me alone on the deck, gazing at the stars reflected in the dark water. "Thank you for coming this week," he said, leaning against the railing beside me. "It means a lot to the kids, and to me." "I'm glad to be here," I replied honestly. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I know things haven't been easy with Becky. She's protective of our family unit. Sometimes too protective." It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging Rebecca's behavior over the past year. "She loves the children," I said carefully. "We have that in common." Thomas smiled faintly. "Dad would be proud of how you've handled all this. He always said you were stronger than anyone gave you credit for." The mention of James sent a familiar pang through my heart. "I miss him," I admitted, "especially in moments like this. He always knew how to navigate family tensions without anyone feeling diminished." "I miss him too." Thomas fell silent, then added quietly, "I'm sorry I wasn't more aware of what was happening with your visits to the kids. I should have paid more attention." "You were caught in the middle," I said, patting his arm. "It's not an easy place to be." "Still." He stared out at the lake. "When I was growing up, you and Dad were always there for Olivia and me. Always. I don't want Lily and Jack to miss out on having their grandmother in their lives the way I had mine." His words warmed me more than he could know. "We're finding our way back," I assured him. "That's what matters." The rest of the vacation passed peacefully, with only minor friction when Rebecca rearranged the day's plans without consulting me, or when she interrupted a story I was telling the children about their father's childhood. Misadventures. Small reminders that while the ice had thawed, we weren't yet on solid ground. Back in Ashford, our new routine continued to evolve. My Wednesday visits extended to include dinner, and I now had both children for a full day every other weekend. Rebecca remained cordial but watchful, like someone who had declared a ceasefire but hadn't fully committed to peace. The next challenge came in late August, as the new school year approached. Rebecca forwarded me the tuition invoice for Lily's next semester at the academy, along with enrollment paperwork for Jack's preschool program there. The combined total was substantial, over $25,000 for the semester. I reviewed the materials carefully, noting that Jack's program cost nearly as much as Lily's despite being only 3 days a week. When I inquired about this, Rebecca sent a terse email explaining the exceptional nature of the program, complete with specialized arts instruction and early language immersion. It all sounded impressive on paper, but something didn't feel right. I remembered Jack's current preschool, Little Explorers, where he had thrived, made friends, and come home with adorable art projects and new songs he'd learned. He spoke of his teachers with affection and excitement. I decided to visit both schools before approving the transfer of funds. Little Explorers welcomed me warmly, the director remembering me from the days when I'd occasionally picked Jack up. The classrooms were bright and inviting, if not luxurious, filled with children's artwork and cozy reading corners. The curriculum was play-based but structured, with plenty of attention to early literacy and social skills. Jack is such a joy to have in our dinosaurs class, his teacher told me. He's made tremendous progress this year, especially in his confidence during group activities. The contrast with the Academy's early childhood program was stark. While undeniably impressive, with its gleaming facilities and uniformed children, it felt oddly sterile. The classrooms were beautiful, but museum-like, with educational displays that seemed designed to impress parents rather than engage children. The children themselves moved through their activities with a kind of practiced precision that seemed unnatural for 4-year-olds. The director, a polished woman in a designer suit, emphasized the program's academic advantages. Our graduates test in the 98th percentile for kindergarten readiness, she informed me proudly. Many go on to attend prestigious elementary schools. When I asked about playtime and social development, she smiled thinly. We integrate purposeful play into our curriculum, of course, but our focus is on preparing children for academic success. I couldn't help but wonder if this environment was truly right for energetic, dinosaur-loving Jack, who thrived on imaginative play and whose eyes lit up when he spotted a puddle to splash in or a bug to examine. After my visits, I called Thomas to share my concerns. Jack seems very happy at Little Explorers, I suggested gently. The Academy's program is impressive, but it feels very intense for a 4-year-old. Thomas sighed. Rebecca is set on it. She feels it's important for the children to have consistent educational experiences. Is that what Jack wants? I asked. Has anyone asked him? A pause. I'm not sure preschoolers get to make those decisions, Mom. Maybe not entirely, I conceded. But shouldn't his happiness be part of the equation? The trust is meant to serve the children's best interests, not just their academic advancement. I'll talk to Rebecca, Thomas promised, though he sounded doubtful about the outcome. That evening, Rebecca called me directly, a rare occurrence. Thomas mentioned you have concerns about Jack's enrollment, she began without preamble. I'm wondering if it's the right fit for him, I said carefully. He seems to be thriving at Little Explorers. Little Explorers is fine for basic childcare, Rebecca replied dismissively, but the Academy offers advantages that will benefit him throughout his academic career. Starting him there now ensures continuity with Lily and secures his place for kindergarten. Jack is only 4, I reminded her. He has plenty of time for academic pressure later. Right now, perhaps a nurturing, play-based environment better serves his developmental needs. With all due respect, Martha, Rebecca's voice cooled several degrees. We are his parents. We make the educational decisions for our children. And I am the trustee of the fund you're asking to pay for those decisions, I countered. The trust specifies that disbursements must serve the children's best interests, not just their parents' preferences. The line went silent for a moment. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice was carefully controlled. Are you refusing to pay Jack's tuition? I'm suggesting we consider whether this particular program is right for Jack at this stage. The trust can certainly pay for preschool, but it should be a preschool that suits his temperament and needs. I see. The 2 words were brittle with suppressed anger. Well, I suppose we'll have to discuss this further. Good night, Martha. She hung up before I could respond. The next day, Thomas called. Mom, can we meet for coffee? Just the 2 of us? We met at Maple Street Cafe, where Thomas arrived looking tired and conflicted. After ordering, he leaned forward, fingers interlaced on the table. Rebecca is very upset about the preschool situation, he began. I gathered that, I replied. She feels you're overstepping, using the trust to control our parenting decisions. I took a measured sip of my coffee. That's not my intention. But as trustee, I have a responsibility to ensure the funds are used in ways that genuinely benefit the children. And you don't think the academy would benefit Jack? Thomas asked, sounding genuinely curious rather than confrontational. I think it might benefit him eventually, I said carefully. But right now, at 4 years old, I believe he needs a learning environment that embraces his energy and creativity. The academy is impressive, but it feels restrictive for a child like Jack. Thomas frowned into his coffee. When Dad set up the trust, did he intend for you to have veto power over our educational choices? It was a fair question, one I'd been wrestling with myself. I don't think he anticipated this exact situation, I admitted. But he did make me trustee, not you or Rebecca. He must have had reasons for that. Maybe he just trusted your judgment, Thomas suggested. Or maybe he foresaw that there might be competing interests to balance, I replied gently. The children's needs, their parents' ambitions, outside pressures. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Jack does love his current preschool, he finally acknowledged. He talks about his friends there all the time. Has he visited the academy? Seen where he'd be going? Thomas shook his head. Rebecca thought it would be easier to just transition him after summer break. Perhaps he should visit first, I suggested. See how he responds to the environment. If he loves it, that would certainly influence my thinking. Thomas considered this, then nodded slowly. That's reasonable. I'll talk to Rebecca about arranging a visit. A week later, they took Jack to tour the academy. That evening, Thomas called me. It didn't go well, he admitted. Jack was intimidated by the formality. He kept asking when we could leave, and he cried when we explained this might be his new school. What does Rebecca think now? I asked, a heavy sigh. She says he just needs time to adjust, that children are resistant to change but adapt quickly. And what do you think? A long pause. I think maybe you're right about this one, Mom. Jack might not be ready for that environment yet. It was a significant moment. Thomas acknowledging that his wife's preference might not align with his son's best interest. I treaded carefully. The trust can still cover his tuition at Little Explorers, I offered, and perhaps revisit the academy question for kindergarten, when he's a bit older. Rebecca won't be happy, Thomas warned. Perhaps not, I agreed. But Jack will be. And isn't that what matters most? In the end, Jack remained at Little Explorers, though Rebecca made her displeasure known through a week of frigid communications and pointed remarks about consistency in educational philosophy. But she couldn't argue with Jack's obvious relief at returning to his beloved preschool, or the way he bounced out of the building each afternoon full of stories about his day. Lily's tuition at the academy was paid promptly from the trust, with my full approval. I made sure Rebecca understood I wasn't opposed to the school itself, just to forcing Jack into an environment that didn't suit his current developmental stage. This small victory gave me confidence to be more assertive in other trust-related decisions. When Rebecca proposed an expensive series of advanced math tutoring sessions for Lily, I requested evidence that Lily needed or wanted this additional instruction. It turned out Lily was already excelling in math and found the subject relatively easy. What she really wanted was more time for art, something the trust could certainly support, but in a way that brought her joy rather than additional pressure. Gradually, a new understanding emerged between Rebecca and me. She still viewed me, primarily as a financial gatekeeper, but at least now she recognized that my decisions were guided by the children's best interests, not a desire to undermine her authority. For my part, I acknowledged that as the children's mother, She had insights and ambitions for them that deserved respect, even when I disagreed with her methods. We established a tentative equilibrium, each recognizing the other's role in the children's lives. Not friendship, certainly, but a functional relationship built around our shared love for Lily and Jack. Then came the phone call that upset our careful balance once again. It was a Tuesday evening in October. I was preparing a casserole for the next day's dinner with the children when my phone rang. Thomas's number flashed on the screen. "Hello, dear. Is everything all right?" His voice was tight, controlled in a way that immediately set off alarm bells. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important. Can I come over?" "Of course. Is it the children? Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's fine," he assured me quickly. It's financial. I'll explain when I get there." 30 minutes later, Thomas sat at my kitchen table, a folder of documents before him, looking more distressed than I'd seen him since his father's funeral. "Mom, I need your help," he began, his voice strained. "And I need your discretion." "What's happened?" I asked, pushing a cup of tea toward him. He took a deep breath. "I've made some bad investments. Really bad. We're in financial trouble, serious trouble." My heart sank. "How serious?" "We might lose the house." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father. "I took some risks I shouldn't have, trying to make up for some earlier losses. It all spiraled. I've been hiding it from Rebecca, taking out loans to keep up appearances, but it's reached a breaking point." "Oh, Thomas." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I was embarrassed, ashamed. His voice cracked slightly. "Dad was so good with money, so prudent. And here I am, about to lose everything." "Not everything," I corrected gently. "You have your family, your health. We'll figure this out." He looked up, hope flaring briefly in his eyes. "That's why I'm here, Mom. I need to borrow against the children's trust, just temporarily to get us through this crisis. I can pay it back over time." My heart sank further. "Thomas, the trust isn't structured that way. I can't simply loan you money from it." "But you're the trustee," he pressed. "You have discretion over the funds." "Discretion to use them for the children's benefit, yes, not as a personal loan. To their parents." His expression hardened slightly. "Keeping their home, their stability, that's not a benefit to them?" It was a fair point, and one that gave me pause. Losing their house would certainly impact Lily and Jack negatively. But using the trust funds this way would violate both the letter and spirit of James's intentions. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. Thomas named a figure that made me inhale sharply. It was substantial, nearly a quarter of the total. "Trust assets. That's a lot, Thomas." "I know." He looked down at his hands. "I wouldn't ask if there was any other way." "Does Rebecca know you're here?" I suspected I already knew the answer. He shook his head. "She knows we're having financial difficulties, but not the extent of it. She'd never agree to asking you for help." That complicated matters further. Not only was I being asked to potentially violate the trust terms, but to do so behind Rebecca's back. "I need time to think about this," I said finally, "and to consult with Greg about the legal implications. This isn't a simple request, Thomas." "We don't have much time," he warned. "Weeks, maybe." "I understand, but I need to do this right, if it can be done at all." After Thomas left, I called Olivia immediately. She and Greg arrived the next morning, concerned and ready to help. "Legally, it's problematic," Greg confirmed after reviewing the trust documents. "The trust is explicitly for the children's benefit. Education, healthcare, enrichment. Using it to bail out their parents' financial situation stretches that mandate considerably." "But if they lose their home?" I pressed. "Surely that affects the children negatively." "It does," he acknowledged. "But there are other potential solutions to their financial problems: bankruptcy protection, loan restructuring, even selling the house and downsizing before foreclosure becomes necessary. The trust should be a last resort, not a first response. Olivia, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. There's something else to consider, Mom. If Thomas is hiding the full extent of this from Rebecca, what else might he be hiding? How do we know the money would actually solve the problem and not just postpone a bigger crisis? It was a painful question, but one I couldn't ignore. I had raised my son to be honest and responsible, but his secretiveness about this situation raised red flags. What do you suggest? I asked them both. Greg leaned forward. I think we need more information, the complete financial picture, not just the crisis Thomas is presenting. And Rebecca needs to be involved. This affects her and the children too much to keep her in the dark. Thomas won't like that, I warned. Maybe not, Olivia replied. But if you're even considering using the trust to help them, full transparency is non-negotiable. They were right, of course. Painful as it might be, this situation required complete honesty from everyone involved. I called Thomas that evening. I've thought about your request, I told him, and I'm willing to consider it, but only under certain conditions. Name them, he said eagerly. First, I need full financial disclosure. All accounts, all debts, all investments, everything. Greg has offered to review it confidentially. Thomas hesitated. That's a lot of private information, Mom. You're asking for a lot of money, Thomas, I replied firmly. Money meant for your children's future. This level of transparency is non-negotiable. All right, he conceded, reluctantly. What else? Rebecca needs to be involved in these discussions, I said. I won't go behind her back. This affects her and the children too directly. A long silence. She'll be furious with me, he finally said, his voice small. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But marriages have weathered worse than financial difficulties, Thomas. Secrets and lies are often more damaging than the problems they're hiding. After another pause, he agreed to my conditions. We arranged to meet at my house the following evening, all of us, including Rebecca. It was one of the most difficult family meetings I've ever experienced. Rebecca arrived looking confused and wary. When Thomas finally revealed the extent of their financial troubles, her expression shifted from shock to disbelief to fury. How could you keep this from me? She demanded, her voice shaking. All this time, pretending everything was fine, when we were on the brink of losing everything? Thomas had no good answer, just apologies and explanations that sounded hollow even to my sympathetic ears. Greg, bless him, steered the conversation back to practical matters. The situation is serious but not hopeless, he said, reviewing the financial documents Thomas had provided. There are several potential paths forward, some more painful than others. He outlined the options. Bankruptcy protection, aggressive, debt consolidation, selling assets including possibly their home, or using a portion of the children's trust as a last resort. Is that even legal? Rebecca asked sharply, looking at me. It's complicated, I admitted. The trust is designed for the children's benefit, not as a financial safety net for their parents. Using it this way would require careful legal structuring and would reduce the funds available for their future education. Then it's out of the question, Rebecca said firmly. I won't rob my children's future to fix Thomas's mistakes. Thomas flinched at her words but didn't argue. There may be a compromise position, Greg suggested. The trust could purchase a more modest home that the family would live in, with appropriate rental payments to the trust. That would maintain a stable environment for the children while preserving the integrity of the trust's purpose. This sparked a lengthy discussion about practical alternatives, what assets they could liquidate, what lifestyle changes they'd need to make, how they could restructure their finances to avoid complete collapse. Throughout it all, Rebecca remained coldly furious with Thomas, but engaged constructively with the financial planning. For all her faults, she was pragmatic and resilient when faced with crisis. By the end of the evening, a tentative plan had emerged. They would sell their large house immediately, before foreclosure became imminent. The trust would purchase a smaller house in the same school district, which the family would rent at fair market value. Thomas would seek professional financial counseling and commit to complete transparency about their finances going forward. And Rebecca would return to full-time work in real estate, something she had stepped back from when Jack was born. It wasn't an easy solution, but it was one that protected the children's interests while acknowledging the reality of their parents' situation. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said stiffly, "for not simply handing over the money when Thomas asked, for insisting on involving me." It was perhaps the most genuine moment we'd ever shared, an acknowledgement that despite our differences, we both prioritized the children's well-being above all else. "We're family," I replied simply. "All of us. We'll get through this together." She nodded once, then followed Thomas to their car. The next weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Thomas and Rebecca listed their house and began house hunting for a more modest home. I worked with Greg to set up the legal framework for the trust to purchase the new property. Olivia helped the children adjust to the idea of moving, framing it as an adventure rather than a loss. Throughout this tumultuous time, my relationship with Rebecca underwent a subtle transformation. The crisis had forced a new level of honesty between us, stripping away the polite fictions and power struggles that had characterized our interactions for so long. We still weren't friends. Too much history stood between us for that. But we had become genuine allies in navigating a difficult situation for the sake of Lily and Jack. She consulted me about house options, considering my input about neighborhoods and school boundaries. I respected her determination to protect the children from unnecessary disruption during the transition. Most surprising was her decision to include me in telling the children about the upcoming changes. "You're an important constant in their lives," she acknowledged when I expressed surprise at the invitation. "They'll need that stability now more than ever." The conversation with Lily and Jack was difficult, but ultimately positive. We emphasized the advantages of their new situation: a backyard with a tree house, bedrooms right across the hall from each other, a park within walking distance. Lily had questions about whether she'd have to change schools, she wouldn't, and whether her friends could still visit. Of course they could. Jack was primarily concerned about where his dinosaur collection would go in the new house. "And will Grandma still come on Wednesdays?" he asked anxiously. "Absolutely," Rebecca assured him. "Some things won't change at all. Grandma will always be here for you both." The look we exchanged in that moment wasn't quite friendship, but it was something close to mutual respect, an acknowledgement that despite our complicated history, we had finally found common ground in our shared love for these two children. As the moving date approached, I found myself reflecting on James and what he might think of all these developments. The trust he had established had served purposes he never could have anticipated, not just funding education and enrichment, but ultimately preserving family stability during a crisis, and perhaps most importantly, forcing his son and his daughter-in-law to include me in their children's lives when they might otherwise have pushed me to the margins. Whether he had foreseen any of this was impossible to know. But I like to think he would approve of how his careful planning had ultimately brought the family closer together, rather than driving us apart. The trust that Rebecca had once seen as an obstacle to her autonomy, and that Thomas had viewed as a potential quick fix for his mistakes, had become instead a foundation for a new, more honest family dynamic, one built on shared responsibility and mutual respect rather than power struggles and hidden agendas. It wasn't the relationship I had initially hoped for with my daughter-in-law, but as I helped the children pack their treasured possessions for the move to their new home, I realized it might actually be something better. A relationship based on truth rather than pretense, on genuine collaboration rather than forced politeness. And for the grandchildren I loved more than anything in the world, that was a far more valuable inheritance than any trust fund could provide. The move to the new house happened on a crisp Saturday in November. The modest colonial on Birch Street had none of the pretentious grandeur of their previous home in Oak Ridge Estates, but it offered something more valuable, a fresh start. I arrived early that morning, thermos of coffee in hand, ready to help with the transition. To my surprise, Rebecca was already there, directing movers with calm efficiency. "Martha," she acknowledged with a nod. "The children's rooms are upstairs. To the right. We've marked their boxes." I headed upstairs to find Lily sitting cross-legged on her bare mattress, sorting through a box of books. "Grandma!" Her face brightened. "Did you see my new window seat? I can read here and watch the birds in that big tree." I admired the cozy alcove, already envisioning her curled up with a book on rainy afternoons. "It's perfect for you, sweetheart. Should we arrange your bookshelf together?" We spent the next hour organizing her room, placing treasured objects just so: the collection of smooth stones from our lake vacation, the framed butterfly drawing James had helped her with before he passed, the ceramic unicorn Thomas had brought back from a business trip to San Francisco. Jack was more interested in exploring every corner of the new house than in unpacking. He darted from room to room, checking closets and cabinets, measuring doorways with his arms spread wide. "Grandma, my room has a secret," he announced breathlessly, grabbing my hand and pulling me across the hall. "Look," he pointed triumphantly to a small door built into the wall near the ceiling, probably access to some pipes or electrical wiring. "What do you think is in there?" I asked, playing along. His eyes widened. "Maybe a map to treasure, or a door to another world, or a dinosaur egg that's been waiting for me." I smiled at his imagination. "Well, whatever it is, it's lucky you found it." The day progressed in a blur of boxes and furniture arrangements. Thomas arrived at midday with a load from their storage unit, looking exhausted but relieved. This simpler home meant simpler finances, fewer pretenses to maintain. Despite the circumstances, the relief in his demeanor was unmistakable. By evening, the essential rooms were functional, if not fully settled. Rebecca ordered pizza for everyone, including the movers, a gesture of unexpected generosity that surprised me. We gathered around the kitchen table, eating from paper plates amid half-unpacked boxes. "A toast," Thomas proposed, raising his paper cup of soda. "To our new beginning." We all raised our cups, even the children joining the simple ceremony. "And to Grandma," Jack added, his face serious, "for helping us get a house with a secret door." Rebecca's eyes met mine across the table. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "To Martha, for more than just the house." It wasn't an effusive thank you, but coming from Rebecca, it carried significant weight. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without requiring more. As twilight deepened, I prepared to leave. The family needed time alone in their new space to begin creating memories that belonged uniquely to them. Thomas walked me to my car. "Mom," he said, his voice catching slightly, "I don't know how to thank you. Not just for the house, but for, well, everything. For not judging me when I messed up so badly." I touched his cheek, this grown man who would always be my child. "That's what family does, Thomas. We help each other through the hard times without judgment." "I've learned my lesson," he promised. "No more financial secrets, no more risky investments. I'm going to be worthy of this second chance." I believed him. Despite his mistakes, Thomas had always had a good heart. He'd lost his way temporarily, seduced by the trappings of wealth and status that had never been values in our family home. "Your father would be proud of how you're handling this," I told him. "Not the mistakes, we all make those, but the courage to face them and move forward." His eyes glistened in the fading light. "I hope so." as I drove home to my quiet house. I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamic had shifted in just a few months. The trust fund that had once been a source of tension and power struggles had become, unexpectedly, the foundation for a more honest relationship among us all. There was still plenty of healing to do, but for the first time, I felt genuinely hopeful about our future as an extended family. That hope was tested the following week when I arrived for my regular Wednesday visit. The house was chaotic, boxes still everywhere, Rebecca on a work call in the kitchen, the children squabbling over a missing toy. "I told you to keep it in your room," Lily was saying, her voice rising. "Now it's lost forever." "It's not lost," Jack insisted tearfully. "It got packed in the wrong box." I stepped in, suggesting we make a game of searching for the elusive toy dinosaur. We turned it into a paleontological expedition, complete with hand-drawn maps and careful excavation of several boxes. When we finally unearthed the plastic triceratops from a box labeled Kitchen Miscellaneous, Jack's triumphant grin made the entire treasure hunt worthwhile. Rebecca, finished with her call, appeared in the doorway. "I see the expedition was successful," she observed, a hint of amusement in her voice. "Grandma made it fun," Lily explained, even though Jack was being a baby about his toy. "I wasn't a baby," Jack protested. "Paleontologists care about finding all the bones, even the small ones." "That's absolutely right," I agreed, giving him a conspiratorial wink. Rebecca surprised me by joining our little group on the floor. "Well, since we have an expert paleontologist and an assistant," she nodded at Lily, "maybe we could use help finding some other items that seem to have migrated to the wrong habitats." We spent the next hour as a team, locating misplaced items and returning them to their proper homes. It was the most relaxed interaction I'd ever had with Rebecca and the children together. No power dynamics, no underlying tension, just a family working cooperatively on a shared goal. As weeks passed, the new house gradually transformed from a collection of rooms filled with boxes to a genuine home filled with life. I noticed subtle changes in both Thomas and Rebecca, without the pressure of maintaining appearances in their exclusive neighborhood. They seemed more authentic, less concerned with what others might think. Rebecca, who had returned to work full-time at her real estate firm, developed a new confidence that had nothing to do with designer clothes or social connections. She spoke with pride about closing difficult deals and rebuilding her client base. More surprisingly, she began consulting me occasionally about balancing work and family obligations. Genuine questions from one working mother to another, who had navigated similar challenges. Thomas, humbled by his financial mistakes, but no longer crushed by them, found renewed energy for his role at the investment firm. His focus shifted from chasing aggressive returns to building sustainable portfolios for his clients, a philosophy much closer to James's approach than the high-risk strategies that had led to their downfall. The children adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that continually amazes me in the young. Lily discovered that her new school route passed a small art gallery that changed its window display monthly, giving her fresh inspiration for her own creations. Jack befriended the elderly man next door, who, as luck would have it, had worked as a geologist and possessed an impressive collection of fossils he was delighted to share with an enthusiastic 4-year-old. My role in their lives expanded naturally. Without the territorial boundaries Rebecca had once enforced, I found myself included in more family decisions and activities. When Jack needed a costume for his preschool's dinosaur day, Rebecca called me for help, remembering that I'd been handy with a sewing machine in my younger days. Together, we created a Stegosaurus outfit that became the envy of his class. When Lily struggled with a particularly challenging math concept, Thomas suggested she spend Saturday morning with me, knowing my background in education might offer a different approach than they had tried. The proud smile on her face when she finally understood was a gift I'll treasure always. Even my relationship with Rebecca evolved in ways I never expected. We weren't friends, exactly, but we had become something perhaps more meaningful. Partners in nurturing the children we both loved. The power struggle that had characterized our early interactions gave way to mutual respect for our distinct roles in Lily and Jack's lives. Christmas approached, the first in their new home. I worried privately that the children might feel the contrast between this more modest celebration and the lavish holidays of previous years. But when I arrived, Christmas Eve, for the family dinner that had become our tradition, I found the house transformed into a wonderland of homemade decorations. Paper snowflakes hung from every doorway. Strings of popcorn and cranberries adorned the modest pine tree in the corner. Hand-painted ornaments, clearly the work of small fingers, dangled from its branches. The children made everything. Rebecca explained when she saw my expression. We decided to start some new traditions this year. One of those traditions, it emerged, was having me stay overnight on Christmas Eve so I could be there when the children woke to see what Santa had brought. Rebecca had prepared the guest room with obvious care. Fresh linens, a small vase of winter greens, a carafe of water on the nightstand. We thought it would be special for the children, she explained, a hint of her old formality returning. But of course, only if you'd like to. I'd love to, I assured her, touched by the invitation. That night, after the children finally settled into sleep, vibrating with holiday excitement, the three adults gathered in the living room. Thomas built a fire in the small fireplace, and Rebecca surprised me by producing a bottle of James's favorite scotch. I saved this from the move, she said, pouring small measures into 3 glasses. It seemed fitting for tonight. We raised our glasses in a silent toast, the unspoken presence of James hovering among us. For a moment, I felt the acute ache of his absence. He should have been here, watching his grandchildren grow, guiding his son through life's challenges. And yet, I could almost hear his quiet chuckle, could almost see the approving twinkle in his eye at how his careful planning had helped preserve what mattered most. To James, Thomas said softly, who always saw further ahead than the rest of us. To James, Rebecca and I echoed. We sat in companionable silence, watching the fire dance. Then Rebecca spoke, her voice unusually hesitant. I owe you an apology. Martha. Several, actually. I looked at her in surprise. In all our interactions, through conflicts and compromises, Rebecca had never explicitly apologized for anything. For keeping the children from you, she continued. For treating you like an adversary rather than family. For many things. Thomas watched us both, his expression a mixture of hope and wariness. I considered my response carefully. This moment felt pivotal, a chance to either cement our new understanding or reopen old wounds. We've all made mistakes, I said finally. What matters is that we found our way to a better place, for the children's sake. Rebecca nodded, her usual composure slightly fractured. Still, I want you to know that I recognize what I did was wrong. At the time, I thought I was protecting our family unit, establishing boundaries. But I was really just controlling. Insecure, maybe. Her admission stunned me. Rebecca had always projected such confidence, such certainty in her approach to family and motherhood. To hear her acknowledge insecurity was like witnessing a carefully constructed wall crumble. Being a mother is complicated, I offered. We all do what we think is best, even when we're wrong. You never tried to control Thomas and Olivia the way I tried to control our family, she pointed out. I smiled faintly. You don't know how many mistakes I made with them. Different ones, perhaps, but mistakes nonetheless. Thomas leaned forward. The point is, we're finding a better balance now. All of us. Rebecca met my eyes directly. Because of you, Martha. Because you didn't give up on us, even when I gave you every reason to. The simple acknowledgement warmed me more than the fire or the scotch. Not because I needed credit, but because it represented how far we had come, from adversaries to allies, from suspicion to something approaching trust. Family is worth fighting for, I said simply. Always. Christmas morning arrived in a flurry of excitement and torn wrapping paper. The gifts were fewer and more modest than in previous years, but the joy was, if anything, more genuine. I had carefully chosen presents that reflected each child's passions. A professional quality sketch pad and pencils for Lily, a fossil, excavation kit for Jack. But the gift that brought the most excitement was the one I'd agonized over the most. A weekend at the Museum of Natural History, Lily read from the colorful certificate. With overnight camping in the dinosaur hall? For all of us, I explained. A family adventure in February. If your parents approve, of course. I glanced at Thomas and Rebecca, who had been consulted about the plan in advance. We think it sounds wonderful, Thomas assured the children. A real expedition for our paleontologist and artist to document the findings. Jack could hardly contain himself. We're going to sleep with real dinosaur bones? Real fossils, Lily corrected, with big sister authority. And I'm going to draw them all. Watching their excitement, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. This joy, this family unity, this sense of new traditions forming from the ashes of old conflicts, was worth every difficult conversation, every uncomfortable confrontation. Later, as Rebecca and I prepared dinner in the kitchen while Thomas entertained the children with their new gifts, she surprised me again. I've been thinking about the trust, she said, carefully trimming green beans. About how James set it up. I waited, unsure where this was headed. He was right. To make you the trustee, she continued. I wouldn't have seen it before, but I do now. You've always had their best interests at heart, even when it meant standing up to me. That couldn't have been easy to acknowledge, I observed. She gave a small laugh. It wasn't. I'm not particularly good at admitting when I'm wrong. Few of us are. Rebecca set down her knife and faced me directly. I want you to know that I trust your judgment with the children, not just with the finances, but with them, what they need, how to support their individual paths. It was perhaps the most meaningful gift I could have received, this acknowledgement from a woman who had once seen me as a threat to her authority, who had systematically excluded me from her children's lives. Thank you, I said simply. That means a great deal to me. She nodded once, then returned to her task. Rebecca would never be effusive or overly emotional. That wasn't her nature. But in her way, she had extended an olive branch that went beyond our careful truce to something that felt remarkably like family. As winter melted into spring, our new family dynamic continued to evolve and strengthen. The children thrived in the stability of clear boundaries and consistent love from all the adults in their lives. My Wednesday visits and weekend outings remained sacred, but I was also included in spontaneous family activities, Sunday afternoon bike rides, impromptu trips for ice cream, Lily's art show at school. The trust fund, once a source of tension, became instead a tool for thoughtful planning. Rebecca and I established a monthly meeting to discuss upcoming needs and opportunities for the children. Sometimes these were straightforward. Dental work not covered by insurance, summer camps that aligned with their interests. Other times we debated the merits of different enrichment activities, weighing cost against potential benefit. To my surprise, Rebecca often deferred to my judgment in these discussions. You have a clearer perspective sometimes, she admitted during one such conversation. I get caught up in what other parents are doing for their children, what looks impressive, on paper. You see Lily and Jack for who they really are. It was perhaps the greatest compliment she could have given me. Acknowledgement that my love for my grandchildren gave me unique insight into their needs and capabilities. Thomas, watching this unlikely alliance form between his mother and his wife, seemed relieved and slightly bemused. If Dad could see you two now, he commented one evening as the three of us reviewed summer plans. He wouldn't believe it. Oh, I think he would, I disagreed. James always played the long game. He understood people's essential nature, even when circumstances temporarily brought out their worst instincts. Rebecca looked thoughtful. He knew I could be difficult, she acknowledged. Controlling? But he never made me feel judged for it. He saw your strength, I told her. Your determination to give your children every advantage. He respected that, even when your methods differed from ours. It was true. James had maintained a cordial relationship with Rebecca even when she was at her most rigid and exclusive. He had somehow seen past her defensive barriers to the fierce protective love beneath. The same love that now, tempered by humility and hardship, allowed her to form genuine connections with others. The museum adventure in February had been a turning point of sorts. Spending 36 hours together in close quarters, sleeping on cots in the echoing dinosaur hall, sharing meals in the museum cafeteria, exploring exhibits as a unified family, had broken down the last of our formal barriers. Jack's unrestrained excitement and Lily's thoughtful observations had given us common ground, shared joy in their distinct personalities. There had been moments of tension, of course. Rebecca's instinct to manage every detail had clashed occasionally with my more relaxed approach. But we'd navigated those moments with newfound grace, each recognizing the other's good intentions. By spring, we had settled into a rhythm that felt almost natural. The trust fund discussions became routine, practical rather than fraught. We focused on meaningful investments in the children's development rather than status symbols or competitive advantages. Lily's artistic talents continued to blossom. Rather than the prestigious but rigid program Rebecca had initially favored, we found a mentor, a retired art professor who worked with gifted children in her home studio once a week. The cost was minimal compared to formal programs, but the individualized attention proved invaluable. Lily thrived under this guidance, developing techniques and confidence that a standardized curriculum might never have nurtured. Jack's dinosaur obsession evolved into a broader interest in natural sciences. We discovered that the community college offered Saturday morning junior scientist workshops for preschoolers and early elementary students. The trust covered the modest fee, and Jack found himself among like-minded peers who didn't think it odd to prefer excavating fossils from the sandbox to playing superhero games. These were precisely the kinds of opportunities James had envisioned when establishing the trust. Enrichment activities matched to each child's unique interests and talents, not prestigious programs chosen for their name recognition or networking. Potential. As Thomas and Rebecca stabilized their finances and adjusted to their new circumstances, I noticed other positive changes in their family life. Without the pressure to maintain appearances, they seemed more present with each other and with the children. Family game nights replaced social engagements with Thomas's colleagues. Weekend hikes in nearby conservation land became favorite activities, rather than the elaborate vacations they'd once felt obligated to take. It's strange, Thomas reflected, during one of our quiet conversations. We have so much less now, materially speaking. The house is smaller, the cars are older, the vacations are simpler. But it feels like we have more of what matters. Perhaps because you have more of yourselves to give, I suggested, when you're not exhausted from maintaining a lifestyle beyond your means. He nodded thoughtfully. Dad tried to tell me that, in his way. That true security isn't about the size of your bank account, but about the strength of your relationships. I wasn't ready to hear it then. We all have to learn some lessons through experience, I said, thinking of my own journey. With Rebecca, even when others try to spare us the harder path. The most unexpected development came in late April, when Rebecca approached me with an unusual request. I've been offered a significant opportunity at work, she explained as we sat on my back porch, watching the children explore the garden. A partnership track position, but it would require additional licensing and education, evening classes, some weekend seminars over the next year. That sounds promising, I encouraged. You've certainly earned it with all your hard work. She nodded, twisting her wedding ring, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from her. The thing is, it would mean some additional childcare needs. Thomas can cover some evenings, but with his schedule. You're wondering if I could help, I finished for her. Yes. She met my gaze directly. I know it's a lot to ask. You've already done so much for us. But the children are comfortable. With you. And it would mean they could stay in their own home rather than with a sitter. The request represented a seismic shift in our relationship. From actively limiting my time with the children to explicitly asking me to increase it, the journey we had traveled was remarkable. I'd be happy to help, I told her simply. Just let me know the schedule once you have it. Relief washed over her face. Thank you, Martha. This means, well, it means a great deal. For a moment, I thought she might actually reach for my hand, a physical gesture of connection she had always avoided. Instead, she added softly, "The children will be thrilled. Jack already asks every morning if it's a grandma day." It was enough, this acknowledgement that my presence was valued not just for practical purposes, but for the joy it brought to Lily and Jack. More than enough. As spring eased toward summer, our family settled into its new configuration with increasing comfort. The trust fund decisions became so routine they hardly required formal discussions anymore. Rebecca and I had developed a shared understanding of what constituted appropriate expenditures, and she no longer viewed my trustee role as an intrusion on her parental authority. More importantly, we had found our respective places in the children's lives, complementary roles that supported their growth without competition or territory disputes. Rebecca was their foundation, their primary nurturer and guide. I was their connection to family history, an extra source of wisdom and unconditional love, a different perspective that broadened their world. Thomas, watching this unexpected harmony develop, seemed to stand taller, as if relieved of a burden he'd carried for years, the impossible task of mediating between two strong-willed women who both loved his children fiercely but had seen each other as adversaries rather than allies. On a warm June evening, as we all gathered in their backyard for an impromptu barbecue, I found myself momentarily overcome by the scene before me. Thomas at the grill, laughing at something Jack was demonstrating with elaborate hand gestures. Lily showing Rebecca her latest sketch, their heads bent together in serious artistic consultation. The simple wooden picnic table set with mismatched plates, wildflowers in a mason jar serving as a centerpiece. None of it was perfect or polished. The yard was modest, the furniture well-worn, the meal simple. And yet it held an authenticity and joy that had been missing from their more elaborate lifestyle before. Rebecca approached, offering me a glass of lemonade. "Penny for your thoughts?" I smiled, accepting the drink. I was just thinking how fortunate I am to be here, to be part of this. She followed my gaze to where Thomas was now teaching Jack how to flip a burger, both of them laughing at a failed attempt that landed in the grass. "We're the fortunate uns," she said quietly. "If you hadn't fought for your place in their lives, if you had simply given up when I made it difficult, everything would be different now, and not for the better." It was the most direct acknowledgement she had ever made of our difficult history and its resolution. I sipped my lemonade, allowing the moment its proper weight. "Family is worth fighting for," I said finally, "even when it's hard, especially then." Rebecca nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "You taught me that, among other things." As we joined the others at the table, I felt James's presence acutely, not as an absence or a loss, but as the architect of this moment. His careful planning, his insight into human nature, his faith in the bonds of family even through conflict and misunderstanding, all of it had helped guide us to this imperfect but precious reconciliation. The trust fund that Rebecca had once resented as an intrusion on her authority had become instead a foundation for something far more valuable than money could ever purchase. A genuine family connection that would sustain Lily and Jack throughout their lives, long after the financial resources had served their purpose. And in that realization was perhaps the greatest irony of all. By refusing to let me see my grandchildren until she needed access to their trust fund, Rebecca had inadvertently set in motion the very process that would ultimately bring us together, as true family, bound not by obligation or financial necessity, but by the simple, profound love we shared for two remarkable children. 5 years have passed since that pivotal summer when our family found its new balance. Lily is now 13, a thoughtful young artist whose watercolors have won regional competitions. Jack, at 10, remains fascinated by paleontology, but has expanded his interest to include astronomy and marine biology. All the sciences where you discover things, as he explains it. The trust fund continues to serve its purpose, funding educational opportunities tailored to their individual talents and interests. Lily attended a prestigious summer art program in New York last year, not because it was exclusive or impressive on a resume, but because her mentor believed she was ready for the challenge of working alongside serious young artists from around the country. Jack's science camp in the mountains allowed him to study ecosystems firsthand, returning home with endless stories about watershed formation and nocturnal wildlife. What matters most, though, isn't how the money has been spent, but how our family has grown around and beyond the financial arrangements that once threatened to divide us. Rebecca completed her additional certifications and became a full partner at her real estate firm, finding professional fulfillment she had previously sought through social status. Thomas rebuilt his career on sounder principles, regaining confidence, without returning to the risky behaviors that had caused their financial collapse. Their modest home on Birch Street has become a genuine haven, filled with children's artwork, science projects, the comfortable clutter of a family that values experiences over appearances. They never returned to Oak Ridge Estates or its equivalent, discovering instead that their happiest memories were created in this smaller space where no one needed to maintain pretenses. My role as grandmother has evolved beyond anything I could have imagined during those dark days of exclusion. I'm no longer fighting for scraps of time with my grandchildren, but am deeply woven into the fabric of their daily lives. I help Lily with her portfolio development for the specialized arts high school she hopes to attend. I drive Jack to his junior astronomers meetings at the observatory twice monthly. Most Wednesday evenings still find me at their dinner table, now discussing middle school dynamics and current events rather than preschool adventures. Rebecca and I have developed a relationship that, while never overly sentimental, is built on genuine respect and shared purpose. We consult each other about parenting decisions, appreciating our different perspectives, rather than seeing them as threats. She values my experience and historical context. I admire her determination and clear-eyed practicality. We will never be best friends, but we have become something perhaps more meaningful. Family members who have overcome significant conflict to find common ground. Last month brought a moment that crystallized how far we've come. Lily's art teacher had nominated her painting for a prestigious youth exhibition at the State Museum. The opening reception fell on the same evening as an important client dinner Rebecca couldn't possibly miss. Without hesitation, she asked if I would accompany Lily to the event. "You've been her biggest artistic supporter," Rebecca said simply. "It should be you standing beside her." The trust in those words, entrusting her daughter's special moment to me, acknowledging my role in nurturing Lily's talent, meant more than any financial authority ever could. At the exhibition, as Lily stood proudly beside her painting, a remarkably sophisticated landscape showing the lake house at dawn, light splintering across the water, a museum patron asked if I was the young artist's mother. Before I could correct, "Her," Lily interjected with confident clarity. "This is my grandmother. She's the one who gave me my first real watercolors and taught me to see light and shadow." She squeezed my hand. I wouldn't be here without her. Later that evening, as I shared this moment with Rebecca over the phone. I heard not jealousy, but genuine pleasure in her response. "Of course she feels that way," Rebecca said warmly. "Your influence on her art has been tremendous." Such generosity of spirit would have been unimaginable in the Rebecca I first knew. The woman who monitored every interaction I had with her children, who saw my love as competition rather than complement to her own. Thomas has found his own peace in this new family configuration. No longer torn between loyalty to his wife and respect for his mother, he has become more fully himself, a devoted father who balances work ambitions with family priorities in a way his own father would have deeply approved. Last week, on the 7th anniversary of James's passing, the entire family gathered at his gravesite. It's a tradition we've maintained, though its character has evolved over time. What began as a somber obligation has transformed into a celebration of his legacy. Not just the financial provisions he made, but the values he lived by that continue to shape our family. Jack placed a small fossil on the headstone, "So Grandpa James can see what I found." Lily propped her latest sketchbook against the granite, open to a portrait of James she'd created from photographs, capturing his kind eyes and the slight smile that always seemed to suggest he knew something you hadn't yet discovered. As we stood together in the dappled shade of the cemetery's oak trees, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not because our family journey was finished, with children growing and changing daily, it never would be, but because the circle had closed on the particular challenge James had unwittingly set before us. The trust fund that Rebecca had once viewed as an intrusion on her parental authority had become a shared resource we managed together for the children's benefit. The grandmother who had once been systematically excluded was now an essential presence in their lives. The family that had fractured under financial pressure and power struggles had reformed into something stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more valuable than what had existed before. That evening, as we gathered for dinner at my house, a regular monthly tradition now, Rebecca helped me in the kitchen while Thomas entertained the children in the garden. As we worked side by side preparing the meal, she surprised me with an observation. "You know, I was thinking about the trust today," she said, slicing tomatoes for the salad. "How differently everything might have gone if James hadn't made you the trustee." I paused in my task. "How so?" "If he'd left it to Thomas, or to both of us, or even to a bank," she shook her head, "we would have used it differently, probably for all the wrong reasons: status, appearances, keeping up with certain expectations." "You might have come to the same realizations eventually," I suggested. "Maybe, but I doubt it." She arranged the tomatoes carefully on the greens. "And I certainly wouldn't have been forced to include you in our lives. That was the real genius of James's plan, whether he knew it or not." I smiled at the thought. He was always several moves ahead in chess, perhaps in life as well. Rebecca nodded, a rare wistfulness crossing her features. "The irony is that I refused to let you see your grandchildren until I needed access to their trust fund. But what I didn't understand then was that the real inheritance James left wasn't the money at all." "No," I agreed softly. "It was the framework that would eventually bring us together as a family. Money was just the mechanism." She met my eyes directly, with the straightforward honesty that had replaced her former defensiveness. "I'm glad he was smarter than both of us." Our quiet moment of understanding was interrupted by Jack bursting into the kitchen, needing immediate confirmation about whether dinosaurs could swim. Some could, we assured him, and whether we could have dessert before dinner just this once. We could not. As normal family chaos resumed around us, I caught Rebecca's eye across the kitchen. Her slight smile acknowledged what we both knew, that through all the conflict and resolution, the standoffs and compromises, we had arrived at exactly where we needed to be. Not perfect, not without occasional tensions, but genuine. A real family bound together by love for two remarkable children and by the shared wisdom hard-won through our journey. James couldn't have planned it better himself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.